Perfect square numbers. We're going to first start off by looking at square root and squaring again, and making sure we understand what square rooting is and squaring. So if we take a look at square rooting, we are starting with our area, and then we are square rooting, and we are finding side length. When we're talking about squaring something, we're going to make squares. So we're going to need a side length, and we're going to make area or square areas. We're going to make squares. So squaring is finding area, square rooting is finding side length. So we're going to take a look at non-perfect squares, but we're going to first start with just practicing finding square area and side length. So when you see 11 squared, 11 represents our side length. 11 squared, the answer to 11 squared must be area. So when we square 11, okay, do it on your calculator. Make sure that you can do this on your calculator. Go 11 squared. Okay, use the squared button, and you should get an answer of 121 squares. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use this opposite operation, square rooting. So we're going to square root 144 squares. So that 144 represents the number of squares, and the square root then represents the side length. So on your calculator, you should do that, and you should get a side length of 12 units. Okay, so squaring is finding area, square rooting is finding side length. Now, with a calculator, we can find the side length of non-perfect squares. So for example, 7, if I talk about 7 as my squares, that represents the number of squares. It is really hard to make a square with 7 squares. So there's 6 squares and there's 7 squares. It's hard to rearrange those squares to make one big square. So this is what we call a non-perfect square. We'd have to take bits of other squares and move it around, and so the side lengths are not going to be whole numbers. But we can do these on a calculator, and when we do these on a calculator, we're going to find the side length of a 7 squares. So if I have 7 squares, okay, they can't be arranged in a nice grid anymore. The side length of that works out to be, from my calculator, 2.645. So I'm just going to round that to 6.5. Okay, and again, make sure you know how to do that on your calculator. Make sure you type that into your calculator and you're getting the same number. In example 2, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to use your calculator to find the side lengths and do this to 2 decimals. So you're starting with an area of 15. So if we start with area, we're going to find side length by square rooting. So I'm going to take the area and I'm going to square root it. So the side length is going to be the square root of 15. Okay, you type that into your calculator. The square root of 15 is 3.872. So I'm going to round that to 87. And that represents how long the side is. So 3.87. So if I were to try to draw 15 squares, well, the number of squares is going to be 3 full squares, like that. And then we're going to have these areas here are not going to be full squares. There's going to be part squares. There's 9 full squares, and then there's going to be 6 squares made up of all these part squares. Okay, and that's how we get the 3.87. It's going to be 3.87 both ways. So we'll do the same thing here, starting with area. We do square root to get side length. Square rooting 20, we get 4.472. So I'm just going to round that to 4.7. So my side length then is going to be 4.47.